So, do-badders, we've got a treat for you tonight. We often like to speak to runners who have other strings to their bow as such. And our next guest was suggested by a do-badder who had heard them on another podcast talking about how they brought wine to Bhutan, which is a place that I want to run as well. He's run on every continent on Earth. So, welcome to the podcast, the wonderful Michael Juergens. Hey! How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. I mean, where to start, really? Because you've already mentioned before we were recording, you can talk about rum, NFTs, wine, all these things. Like, what is your actual job then?
That's a great question. My primary day job, I actually run the wine consulting practice for one of the big four accounting firms globally. So I basically,
how does that work?
Provide a suite. Well, I mean, if you think about, if you're a winery, you are also a business, and you need things like IT systems and taxes and accounting and audits and internal audits and cybersecurity and mergers and acquisitions and investment banking and all this business stuff that most wine people don't care about, right? They want to make good wine and sell the good wine and drink the good wine. And so, our firm, being a big four firm, we do all of those things, and we do them all over the world. And so, we probably serve wineries in, 18 or 19 different countries around the world. And I figured out how to make my job so I could basically just hang out at wineries and get paid big firm money to do it.
That's incredible. So, because which firm is it out of interest? I was Accenture for quite a few years, but
it's Deloitte.
Okay, fair enough. You got to work, right? You got to make a living somehow. But and so, would you say people in Deloitte who work in the wine sector, would you say they're different in personality then to the people who work in other sectors?
Well, so we definitely have people like me who are very focused on the wine industry, but like a lot of our, for example, if you're doing mergers and acquisitions work, or you're doing due diligence or whatever, that's less of an industry specific play. And so we have some folks who are very industry specific, and we have some folks who are more industry agnostic, but technically proficient in, cybersecurity, making something up.
Yeah.
And so, I would say I often get told that I am not what people think about when they think about a big four partner.
You're drunk.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah. I guess it depends if you want to be like your colleagues or not. So reflection on them in some ways. And so then quickly, before we go into the running side of things, then what would you say is the worst wine that other people think is good? And what would you say is the best wine that is affordable that people might not know about?
Good question. So I think, at least in the United States, we have a wine called Meiomi Pinot Noir that people think is spectacular. I think it is undrinkable. It's
Are they one of your clients?
It's got sugar in it. They are not, and probably after I say this, they never will be. But unfortunately, it's one of those things where, if I was going to eat a hamburger, like I think McDonald's hamburgers are not very good hamburgers, but it's a hell of a good business model, right? And so Meiomi Pinot Noir, for me, it's a hell of a good business model. They created this wine that appeals to a segment of population. They put a screw cap on it so you can easily serve it by the glass in restaurants. And, it tastes like it's a little sweet, it's a little big, it's a little hearty. It's like the Coca-Cola of wines. So awesome business model. I don't want to drink that wine. Just like I don't want to eat a McDonald's hamburger.
So you call it the Coca-Cola of wines, and they probably call it...
depends on, like, if I put my wino hat on.
Yeah, they probably call it the Coca-Cola... So you call it the Coca-Cola wines, but they'd probably call it the Coca-Cola of wines too, but with a slightly different tone in how they say it. A slightly more positive outlook on that.
Yeah, exactly. Which is fine. I can, if I put my business hat on, I can absolutely appreciate the business model around it. if I put my sort of wine lover's hat on, I'm like, I don't want to drink this.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of a wine that I think a lot of people love. That for me, it's just not the style that I prefer. On the flip side, I think Vermentino from the Sardinia, which is an island off the coast of Italy. For me, that's one of the greatest white wines, and it's $13 US. You probably get it for 15. You probably get great examples in England for 15 quid all day long.
Vermentino.
Understated. Yeah, actually, so I just had a bunch of folks from Europe over at a conference here in the United States back in maybe February. And we went out to dinner one night, and I was picking the wines. And so I'm picking the wines, and I wasn't telling anybody prices on them. But we ended up, there was like 10 or 12 of us. I think we had 7 or 8 bottles of wine with dinner. And almost to a man, everybody said the Vermentino was their favorite wine of the night. And it was by far the cheapest, by like a factor of 7 or 8 in some cases. And so at the end of the dinner, I said, hey, what did everyone like the best? Everyone was like, that Vermentino was spectacular. I go, yeah, that's a $12 bottle of wine.
What makes it so good? Are you
kidding me? So I think, Sardinia is this island. And so you get this combination of really hot sunshine. So the grapes get really ripe during the day. But then you get these cool ocean breezes that cool them down at night. And so they ripen very slowly. The Vermentino that they make on the mainland of Italy, I'm not as big a fan of. But then you also get this really kind of volcanic smoky character and this saline character, I think, that comes from proximity to the ocean. It kind of tastes like eating smoking a cigar while you're eating a sweet Meyer lemon. It's just this awesome, just super refreshing, tasty little white wine.
So right, I'm gonna get some of those for Briggsy for her birthday. Some of that wine. So Briggsy's my wife, by the way. Just to clarify. So when did running kind of fit into your life then? How does that? Is that just I guess a way to escape the office for you?
I mean, I think I started running probably at around 22. I never really ran growing up. And actually, I'll say a funny story. My friend and I, we were training pretty hard for, various things, spending a lot of time in the gym together. And we were about 22 and in really good shape. And the LA Marathon was that weekend. And I was driving to the gym to work out with him. And I heard on the radio, LA Marathon. And I got to the gym and I said, hey, Brian, let's run the LA Marathon this weekend. And he goes, we can't run a marathon. We don't know how to do that. And I go, God, dude, how hard could it be? Let's just go do it. Come on. And he's like, this is stupid. And I go, so what? So if we fail, we fail. Like, why not? Let's go. And so he said, all right. And like, literally, I was the dude at the start line, like taking my shoes out of the box kind of thing. And I didn't train at all, ran out. And then it was every bit as horrible as you might imagine for someone who was stupid enough to try to do that. But I finished. And that was kind of what lit that switch in my head that I was like, all right, I hate this, but there's something to this. I need to maybe explore this a little bit more. And so just kept kind of doing different races, and then finally started looking for the crazy, stupid ones.
And did your friend finish as well?
He did. We both finished.
And did he turn into a runner?
No, not at all. Matter of fact, the following year, I said to him again, I go, hey, dude, remember when we did the marathon last year? And he goes, yeah. And I go, let's do it again. And he goes, well, let's train for a little bit this time. And so this was, I don't know, a few weeks in advance. So we didn't do any great training, but we did 4 or 6 weeks of training and ran it again. And he was basically like, nope, this is not for me. I don't need to do this again. I did it twice. No more. And I was like, okay. And then I went off and, kept doing it.
And so you...
And I'm not a good runner. I mean...
Well, I think a good runner is somebody who runs a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of... You can't really tell by looking at me, but I'm a pretty stocky dude. And, I'm not a fast runner. but I get it done. And, you know, that's what it's all about. I don't worry about time. I don't worry about my splits or anything. I want to have a good time on a run, and I would prefer to finish. That would be my goal. But if I don't, I don't.
And when did you start kind of venturing further afield then than just marathons and just US-based ones?
So the first one that we did, so I have a buddy who's a writer, and he writes about doing man stuff, and he wanted to go to Antarctica, just as like an adventure.
Is it only men that can go to Antarctica?
Yeah. So he was like, hey, who wants to go to Antarctica? But he found this marathon. He said, we're going to go do the marathon. Yeah. And I was like, I'm in. That sounds awesome. And so about 15 of us said, we're all going to go. And then everybody backed out. And it ended up just being me and two other guys. But I was like, I'm doing this. This sounds awesome. And so that was the first one I did that was really gnarly, crazy, stupid. I thought I was going to die.
And had you prepared well for that?
Changed my perspective.
Like, did you have a good knowledge of the kit, and had you managed to getting an ice chamber or?
No, I mean, so I live in Southern California, and it's hard to train for cold when you live somewhere warm. I did a lot of ice baths. I did a lot of cryotherapy. I did a lot of running in like sand to try to figure out how to run in snow. And so I thought I was prepared. Turns out I wasn't. I was woefully unprepared. My gear was all wrong. Actually, my goggles froze over at one point and I couldn't see. And they had told us, like, if you take your goggles or your sunglasses off, you'll go snowblind, so don't do it. So I had these goggles on, but I couldn't see. And so I was just like, well, I'll just run until I hit a snowdrift, and then I'll fall down, and then I'll pick myself up and I'll run some more. And I did that for about 3 miles. I just ran by Braille. And what I didn't know is the people behind me reported me to the medics. They thought I was having some medical emergency because they're watching me. I just kept like, just running and falling. Yeah. And so I got to there's not that many checkpoints, but I got to the one checkpoint that they had, and I told them, I'm like, hey, I can't see. I have to stop. And the girl there looks at my glasses and she goes, oh yeah, you're properly screwed. And I go, yeah, I have to quit. She took off her sunglasses and handed them to me and said, take mine. And I was like, I hate you. I had a good reason to quit. The gear failure. Now I don't have a reason to quit. And so I took her glasses and I muscled along. And
what?
Then I got lost in a blizzard and I thought I was going to die.
What was the hardest bit of it though?
But the hardest bit of it, so they had told, I mean, it was really cold. It was like maybe -30 and like 50-mile-an-hour winds. And they had told us, like, as long as everything hurts, you're good. But when things start to go numb, you're in trouble. And you need to be really aware of this. Because, like, there's no safety. Yeah. Like, you're out there and there's no help. You know, the nearest help is a 7-hour plane ride away. You know, if they can get in and even land the thing. And so there was a period of time where everything was going numb and I was lost. I had somehow kind of got off track a little bit, and it's just white everywhere. And there was a blizzard and I couldn't see more than about 2 feet in front of my face, and I'm lost. And I'm thinking, like, you can't call for help. There's nothing, like, this is literally, there is one way out of this. You can't stop. If you stop, you freeze to death, right? I mean, this is truly a do or die situation, and you need to find the fortitude to keep going. And I somehow dug deep and found it. And, you know, that was a far more profound running experience for me than like running a marathon in a city with 10,000 other people, and there's a medical tent every mile and a half, and there's water and people and medics and people to help you. I mean, this is me versus the wilderness in a cruel, inhospitable place, and I had to figure out who I was.
Well, I think that's
when I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, I think that's part of the issue with life almost, is that until that moment, you felt probably incredibly safe and in control, You're surrounded by experts. You thought you knew the environment, understood it, and the variables were all laid out in front of you in a way you thought, yeah. And then just one small thing happens, and actually you suddenly look at everything differently.
Yeah, you realize, the way that most people live their lives is pretty damn sheltered. And the opportunity to kind of go look for the edge, wherever your edge is, requires courage and, testicular fortitude.
and do you know what kind of...
And that was what kind of flipped the switch for me. I was like, you need to do different stuff.
So actually at the end of that, you felt kind of invigorated by it rather than concerned.
Well, at the end of it, I got to the end of the race, and I was, there's only like 40 people that did it, and most of the people had already finished. And so I got to the finish line, and I stumbled across it, and I fell down, and I was laying on the ground sobbing. And the race director comes over to me, Richard Donovan.
Yes.
You may know him. He's an Irish guy. And he comes over to me and he goes, "Hey, Mike, we didn't get your photo. So we're going to need you to get up and go back through and run back through the thing." And I go, "Nope, I'm not doing that. I can't. I cannot go 5 feet that way. I am done." And he goes, "Well, don't you want your photo?" And I go, "God damn it, I do want my photo." So I pulled myself up off the ground. I lurched across the finish line. I turned around and I lurched back, and they got a photo of me like stumbling across the finish line. And then we got stranded there on the glacier for like another 5 days because the blizzards were too bad to get the plane in to pick us up. So the sort of epiphany around it didn't happen until a couple weeks later, because I was miserable and trapped on a glacier, and I had just, almost killed myself, and I had to process it. But once back in the States and looking back, and I was like, wow, that was a profound running experience. How do you find that again?
And what, like, and when you say that again, do you mean actually that moment when you could have died? Or would a reduced version of that have fed that desire?
No, so I think when I say that again, what I mean is that I think we are all capable of far more than we acknowledge to ourselves. We sort of set these limits. And I use the example of like the Iron Man. Like people sit there and go like, "Oh my God, an Iron Man is so unattainable, but maybe I could do it." And then the Iron Cowboy comes out and goes, "I'm going to do 50 in 50 days." And everyone's like, "That's impossible." And then he does it. And then he goes, "I'm going to do 100 in 100 days." And then he does that. Like he's just sort of let his brain acknowledge that he is capable of doing that. And we sort of do that, but our level is not where it could be, if that makes sense. And so for me, my level was always, if you could just do a marathon, the LA Marathon, like that's the limit. And actually it's not. And so trying to find something that will let me, test that hypothesis, set a new bar and then test it. And what I find is every time I've done that, I've then been able to raise the bar again and again. And it, running the LA Marathon is now not something I would even think twice about. Like it's just there. Sure, you want to go run it? Let's go run it this weekend. Kind of.
I think you should phone up your friend.
And I think that analogy holds true.
I think you should phone up your friend again and I think you should buy a ticket for your friend and go and do the LA Marathon again and just turn up the day before and be like, "Good news, my man. I've got you a place."
Let's go. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I still hang out with that guy. He's actually coming over to my house on Saturday for a barbecue. So maybe I'll broach the topic with him and see how he reacts. He has been aggressively non-supportive of doing another marathon historically, but maybe this will be easier.
It sounds like it.
But I think the analogy for that in life, I think it's not just running, right? It's everything that we do in life. You set these sort of personal limitations for yourself, whether it's business or money or any other type of thing that you want to do, and the ability to sort of mentally recalibrate that at a higher level, I think is awesome.
And do you think people going into, for example, the Antarctic race, the Antarctic Run, do you think people kind of have a sense of the danger and really comprehend how tough it can be? Or do you think we're almost in our own little bubble until we're exposed to the realities?
I think that there are probably some people who do understand it and appreciate it. They certainly communicate the hell out of it, how dangerous it is. I did not comprehend it until I lived it. And now I have I wish I could do it over again, knowing what I know now. I would approach it quite differently. But
so then what did you then see as your next step up from that?
Well, so the one race that I want to do is in the Kingdom of Bhutan. You mentioned Bhutan, and I started the wine industry there, but it's in the Himalaya mountains, and they do a lot of trekking there. And one of their treks is called the Snowman Trek, and it's 155 miles, and it goes over 5 peaks that are about 18,000 feet a piece. And so they are trying to create the world's hardest ultra on that trail. And they were going to run the first
who's they out of interest?
Ever invitational. Oh, the Kingdom of Bhutan.
Oh, wow.
They want to kind of do it to draw attention to climate change.
Interesting.
And so they had this idea like, hey, we could do this the world's hardest ultra marathon. We could have it invite only. We could run it on this Snowman Trek. We could, get a lot of press and draw attention to global warming and how it's changing the Himalayas, because you're running over these Himalayan peaks. And so I had helped them get organized around it. And so I wasn't going to get to compete in it, but I was going to go and run the course with the competitors. And then COVID happened, and we ended up delaying it. We may do it this year. It may get delayed again, but that's sort of the next step. And by the way, I'm terrified to do this. Terrified. 18,000. There's not an 18,000 foot mountain in America, at least not in the continental U.S. And that's high altitude pulmonary edema, death in the middle of the Himalayas while you're running at altitude.
And do you think they've got
with carrying all your stuff on your back?
Do you think they've got a sense? Think they've got a sense of, like, do they have for example, an ultra consultant who is actually advising them on the physiology, or who's looking at it from a runner's point of view?
Yeah, they actually do, and it's a buddy of mine. His name's Luis Escobar. And he runs a bunch of.
Yeah, I know Luis.
Do you know Luis?
I don't know him, but I had a crap load of caffeine bullet in America that I needed to. I wanted to give away. So I ended up being introduced to Luis. He's in California, right? He puts on races.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So I'm friends with Luis, and he's been to Bhutan. He actually ran the first marathon in Bhutan with me years ago. And so when they were doing this, I had the same thing. I'm like, do you guys know how dangerous this is? You need someone who can put the safety protocols in for the runners. And they said, yeah, we know. And they have hikers on the trails now, right? So they have to worry about that now, but running's a different thing. And so I said, I think my friend Lewis would be interested in doing this, and made the introduction, and then they pulled him in. So he's kind of the race director / safety man / bottle washer guy. But it's a no fooling around kind of legit, serious.
Well, before we go into that, let's rewind and talk about your throwaway comment of bringing wine to Bhutan. I mean, how does that happen?
Well, so I had been studying to become what's called a master of wine. There's about 420 in the world, and there's about 60 in the United States. It's the highest credential you can be awarded as a wine person. So I'd been studying for that. I'd been traveling all over the world, going to every major wine region that I could. And then I went to Bhutan to run a marathon in the Himalayas, because that sounds fun. And when I was there, and I didn't know anything about Bhutan before I went there, but it's the only carbon negative country on the planet. And they have a huge focus on sustainable agriculture. So when I'm there, all I can see is these beautiful terrace slopes. They're growing these beautiful crops, and everything I ate that was like a vegetable or grain was the best whatever I'd ever eat. Best celery, best carrot, best rice. I'm like, Jesus, this place just grows amazing food. And so in my head, I assumed there was wine. Turns out there wasn't. So I'm asking everybody, hey, where are the wineries? I want to visit them. And they're like, what are you talking about? So while we were there, they had a bunch of the government people wanted to have a dinner with the foreigners that came to run this race. And so I ended up at this dinner, and I asked one of the people, hey, where are your vineyards? I want to see them while I'm here. And he said, we don't have any. And so I get incensed. I'm like, how could this be? This is a travesty. You're wasting this beautiful terroir. You must make wine. You must grow grapes. You must start right now. And I'm like, just lighting the guy up.
Were they drinking wine at the dinner? Like, is it something that people from Bhutan have in their diets anyway? Or?
So, interestingly enough, in Bhutan, every family makes their own rice wine. And they make it in their kitchens, and they have their family recipes that they guard secretly. But when you show up at someone's house, they greet you with a bowl of, they call it ara. And so they have this big wine culture. It's really part of how they, the community and how they interact with each other. But they never had grapes. Grapes had just never been brought to Bhutan. And so it is a big part of their culture, but not grape wine. So it wasn't a stretch for them to understand it.
Yeah.
They just hadn't done it before. And so I personally, I didn't necessarily want to start a company in the Himalayas making wine.
Yeah.
I just thought they should do it. So I worked with the country for a few years, actually, to figure out the business model and the plan and the approach and how to do it and where to do it. And then they were like, hey, you want to do it with us?
Did you bring in Vermentino?
And I was like, I didn't bring in Vermentino. Well, let me rephrase that. I have not brought Vermentino in yet, but early days. We're still figuring out all the different grapes that might work there. So Vermentino could very well be on the list.
And so how does that work, even setting up a vineyard? Because we know of it. Well, we've been to vineyards. Most listeners who've been to France or Surrey or wherever it may be, but is it easy to just transport an entire vineyard to a region, and can you just take one plant and grow it out, or does it have to be exported?
I mean, there's a very long answer to this question. I'll try to give you a concise answer, but Bhutan has a lot of different altitudes. So the south side of the country is like 500 feet, and the north side is like 27,000 feet. And that range is about 400 miles. So it basically just goes straight up. And so within that, you have every different climate zone known to man. You have jungle, you have warm, you have moderate, you have freezing cold. So it's a little bit different than Bordeaux, where it's flat and there's one climate. So you kind of figure out what's going to work in that one climate. I have every climate to play with. The other thing that I have to play with is, because of the way the mountains are set up, I have lots of different rainfall patterns. I have some areas that are super wet. I have some other areas that are super dry. And so we don't know which grapes are going to grow well where. So our whole purpose was we have to experiment. And so we had to pick multiple sites at multiple different altitudes and multiple different kind of rain shadows. And then for each one of them, we had to import a bunch of different grape varieties because we don't know which ones are going to work. And then because you're importing foreign species into a country that's the only carbon negative country on the planet, you want to make damn sure you're not bringing in viruses or diseases. And so you want to have a lot of controls around what you bring in, and then when you plant them, how you plant them, where you plant them, and you want to kind of quarantine and study and make sure, you know, nothing bad is happening. And so that process it takes 3 to 5 years to grow a grapevine. So it is not easy. It is an enormous amount of work. But, you know, from my perspective, the last time somebody invented a wine industry in a country that didn't grow wine already was New Zealand in the 1800s.
Wow.
This has not been done in 200 years.
Wow.
And I'm the guy that gets to do it.
And how does that even work?
Right?
Does the king just say, just choose your land, I'll give it to you? Or what are the expectations and what are the limitations?
Well, so the way that Bhutan about 15 years ago, they kind of dissolved the monarchy and they set up more of a political system similar to England, where you have a parliament and you have a prime minister that's head of government, and then you have the royal family and the king, which is head of state. And so we primarily work with the government, the Ministry of Agriculture and Forest, and they all are very interested in seeing this succeed because it fits in with a lot of their shared values. You know, they're an agricultural based economy. They want high value agricultural crops. Wine is pretty high value compared to rice. They have this, they want to export the beauty of Bhutan to the global markets. And what better product than wine? You know, it says Bhutan on the front. People put it in their bodies. They experience a sense of place. So they have been super collaborative, and they've helped us find, you know, the sites. They are making basically the land available to us for long-term leases rather than making us go and purchase a bunch of land. And they've given us, you know, agricultural workers to help, you know, work in the fields. And so it's been an awesome mutual partnership. You know, we still have not made our first wine yet, but think about this. Here's a cool thing. Imagine if you had the first bottle of wine ever made in France. Like, how much would that be worth? That would be in the Louvre, right?
Yeah.
Or the first bottle of wine ever made in Australia or America or wherever. It would be in a museum. It would be like literally a one in a lifetime opportunity, a one in a lifetime bottle. I'm about to make the first wine ever.
And you listeners can win it tonight. All you have to do is hashtag Bad Boy Running. Yes. Yeah, what are you going to do with it?
And if you act now,
what will you do with that?
Well, so I think
the first one.
So we're going to do two things. We're going to do what we call first barrel, which will be the first ever barrel. There'll be 300 bottles. I imagine we'll give probably 100 of them out to various museums, and certainly, you know, the folks in the kingdom that helped make this possible, the investors in the company. Then we'll probably make a small number available for sale, and then the rest of the harvest it'll be the first harvest, which is not as cool as first barrel, but still it's the first harvest, and those bottles will sell. Amazing. And people will have an opportunity to, I mean, can you imagine if you had a bottle from the first harvest ever in New Zealand? Like, how cool would that be?
It's almost such a small batch. It's such a shame because it would be a shame to drink any of them, but at the same point, you want to drink the first bottle as well to get a sense of where it fits in globally, almost in terms of its character.
Yeah, you know, we kind of go back and forth on that. My thinking on it is, particularly for the first barrel, really what I want to do is I want to blend all the grapes from all the vineyards together in that barrel, just because that'll be like, this is truly representative of the first everything, which means that wine's probably not going to be very good to drink, but it'll be representative of the whole thing. So we've been kind of going back and forth on, do we want to make the finest possible wine, or do we want to make this museum piece that truly is represent? I haven't decided yet, by the way. We're still thinking that.
And are you, just out of interest, are you bringing any wines from Santorini? Because I think they're the only place in the world where they can grow the vines on the floor without it being an issue, because they, for one, they get they don't have the issue of there's a certain type of mold or rot that I think has spread around all the other vineyards in the world, but for some reason in Santorini it hasn't had that, and so it could be a good chance to actually have a secondary place globally that can do that process.
Yeah, so Santorini, and particularly the Assyrtiko vine, is resistant to phylloxera, which phylloxera is like a little bug that eats the roots. And there was a phylloxera outbreak in Europe in the 1800s that basically destroyed all of European vineyards. And then people figured out if you could take American rootstock and graft French wine grapes on top of the rootstock, and then the phylloxera couldn't attack the roots, and you could still make wine. So most of Europe is planted on what we call grafted vines. Santorini's not. And so that's one of the big things. And then they circle the vines in these little bird's nest things called cularas. But that's more for the wind. So I actually think, and there are some purists who would argue that ungrafted vines make the truest expressions of the grape. And so the fact that we're grafting, you're actually reducing the quality of wine. I don't know that the scientific data backs that up, but our intention is to make ungrafted roots in Bhutan, primarily because there's no phylloxera there. And there's no way it could get there because there's 15,000 foot mountains between Bhutan and everywhere else. And so the first vines we planted were the grafted kind, because that's all you can get. It's hard to buy ungrafted vines. So, but once we had planted all the first vineyards, we started our own nurseries, and we're growing stuff with ungrafted vines in the country. So we are pursuing that Santorini model, which I think is also just adds to the coolness of the story. You know, there's like 4 places in the world that are still doing it like this. It's like Colares in Portugal, Santorini in Greece, and the Kingdom of Bhutan. That's cool.
And how big could this get for, I guess, the company and for Bhutan?
So we, our 10-year plan has us scaling to about 2,000 acres over the next 7 years. And to put that into context, Napa Valley is like 40,000. So it'd be 1/20th the size of Napa Valley. But if we sort of get to that, you know, we're producing a couple million, 3 million cases of wine a year. That's sort of relevant on the global markets. It's a good business. You know, it'll generate the kind of revenue that makes it worth doing from a capitalistic perspective. And are you going for, because there is a huge marketing opportunity there, but there's a huge opportunity to really make kind of unique blends and unique wine. So where's the balance for that? And also, given that it's not a huge amount of wine to be making, are there limits on how much is allowed to be exported and how much is saved for the locals? Well, I'll touch on the export question first, because that's an easier question. We plan on exporting almost all of it. I think that the quality of this wine is going to be, you know, it's going to make it $150, $200 bottle of wine.
Wow.
And the average salary for a person in Bhutan is $200 a month. So it's, you know, for the average worker. So it's a bottle of wine that would cost them, you know, a month's salary, probably not in their model. And by the way, one of the whole purposes of this is sharing Bhutan with the world. So we want to export it. On the sort of style and quality and quantity question, there's really two philosophies in the wine game. One is, here's a recipe, make wine to this recipe, and we want it to taste like this. It's like the McDonald's model. We want standardization. We want every single burger to be exactly the same, and we're going to sell a ton of it. There's another philosophy that says, no. You take whatever the ground gives you, and you try to capture what that is for that piece of ground. And every piece of ground is different. And we want to capture that and express the beauty of that place. I fall into that second category as a wino. And so my hope is that as we are playing around with different altitudes and different rain shadows, what we'll find is, oh, this Merlot from 1,000 feet in altitude has big plum character and rich tannins, and at 8,000 feet, the Riesling grows really, really well, and you get this steely character, and that's what I hope, and that's what I think will happen. But I don't know what it's going to taste like. It hasn't been done before, so we're experimenting, and we'll probably do our first actual winemaking next summer. So I'm very curious to see if the last decade of my life is going to turn out to be something awesome or something less than awesome.
And have you thought about names yet? Is there a chance of a Bhutan bad boy or?
Okay, so here's the name story. So in the Kingdom of Bhutan, when a baby is born, you take the baby to the monastery, and there's special monks who are in charge of naming the kids. And they give the kid a first name and a last name. And so you can't tell who's related to anybody because everyone has different last names, because the monks give them, here's your two names. And so we have this idea, we're like, hey, we're collaborating with the community. Let's have the monks name our baby. And so we go to the monks, we're like, hey, we have this wine baby. Will you name it? And they're like, absolutely, we'll name it. So they go off and they do whatever they do, and they think about it for like 6 weeks. And they come back and they go, okay, your name is Serkem. 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 And I go, okay.
I'm just going to Google to see if there's any...
Why? What does that mean? Yeah. And so the monks explain it to us. They're like, listen, when someone visits a monastery, it's considered customary to bring an offering for the gods. And the offering could be food, could be money, could be water, could be alcohol. If the offering is alcohol, it is called Serkem, and it is the alcohol of the gods.
Nice. Oh, perfect.
And I'm like, that's a cool story, right? So you hear Serkem and you're like, but then you hear the story and you're like, that's awesome.
Although, if it doesn't wash, I think Wine Baby is a great name for a wine company as well.
Well, so Bhutan has this thing called, they don't measure gross domestic product. They measure gross national happiness.
Yes, that's right, yes.
And so, which I think is an awesome way to live, by the way. Like, it doesn't really matter how rich you are. The purpose of life is to be happy. Be happy. So I wanted to name it actually Happy Wine. But my marketing consultant...
Because it sounds too damn market,
encouraged
doesn't
me
it? Yeah, it's a bit lowbrow.
It sounds like a $5 bottle of wine.
And
whereas the alcohol of the gods sounds
And
better.
how do they measure happiness?
They actually go around and they do like a census almost, where they ask a number of questions, and they get a sense of, by community or by state. I think they call them districts actually. What the responses are. And what's funny is it doesn't really matter what the actual data shows. What they want to see is that it was better than the last time they did it. They want to be improving. And so, if they scored 6 on the happiness scale last year, this year, it'd be great if they could score 6.5, And they also use it to see like, oh, this one district seems like it's scoring lower than the other districts. What's going on over here? Do they not have enough food? Do they not have enough opportunities. They can make policy decisions based on all
that. Wouldn't you game the system though and be like, are you happy? Like, no, I could be made a lot happier. ... And also, if someone asked me on a Monday morning, like, how happy are you today? Could have had a great year, but I'm going to feel a lot less happy than a shit year on a Friday night. So, how did they actually think about when and the circumstances under which people are asked these questions?
I assume that they probably do. I would say I haven't leaned in heavily on the mechanics of how they actually do it. And it's funny. I was having dinner with some bureaucrats one night, and I was I'm inherently curious about stuff in general, but I was asking these kinds of questions, and the one guy he's like a bureaucrat, but he's also like a part-time monk. So he's sort of really sort of deep, and he was like, you know what, Mike? Because people always say, are you guys happier? And he goes, I don't know if we're happier than you are. Like, I don't know that we're happier than anybody. For all I know, we're the most unhappy country in the world. He goes, the difference for us is that it's important. We've made it a priority. We've made it a shared community objective that we want everyone to be happy and be happier than they were the year before and go on. And so we pay attention to it. And we think, that paying attention to it is more important than this subjective, everyone should be, an 8 on the happiness level. And so I think that the government spends a lot of time sort of thinking through, is it an arbitrary data point or is it more a way of living? But I don't know the mechanics of how it works.
So you get a sense of how that feeds into...
It's an interesting philosophy.
Super interesting. And particularly when you look at things like the bigger the wealth divide, the bigger the mental health issues, the more social problems there tend to be in a nation. Like, can you see direct policies that actually the way they tax or the way they deal with some things is dramatically different because happiness is the focus?
So I can, and I'll give you an example. When we go to plant a vineyard in an area, obviously step one is try to find the right land. Is it facing the right direction? Is it sloped the right way? Does it have the right soil type? Does it have the right rain? But let's assume that you find all that. You say, okay, we think that this is a good place to build a vineyard. We can't just go and build a vineyard. We actually have to go and meet with the local community, and the whole town gets a vote. And we're like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Here's why we think it's a good idea. Do you think that this will be helpful to you? Or do you think that you prefer to, I don't know, build a soccer field on it, or whatever. And the whole town gets to weigh in on it. And so that is very different, obviously, than the system that I know in America in terms of getting shit done. And I don't live in one of those towns, but I do think if I did, I would probably feel like, hey, I'm a part of this. I get to help make the decisions. Stuff just doesn't get done to me. It gets to be done with me. And so I see this. We have to have community meetings and we have to have votes and we have to make sure everyone wants to do a vineyard with us. So that's an example.
Do you think it changes how people view money and, as a currency? Is it because you've obviously got certain things that you can achieve, say that football field or building the vineyard, that requires resource, but if that resource is ultimately to then go in to try and improve happiness, is there an exchange rate almost of money to happiness points?
It's interesting in the sense that I was never in the country in the previous political system, right? So I've only seen it in the last years when it's been this, and it's only 15 years old, right? So they're definitely figuring out how to do it. And I think through that, the idea of more of a capitalistic type of system has taken hold, but not in the sort of way that you would have seen it in Russia, right? When Gorbachev tore the wall down and the billionaires took over the oil fields and sold the army tanks to Afghanistan or whatever they did, right? It's more like this. people are sort of like, hey, like, maybe we'll build another hotel, or and so money, there definitely is a money culture there. My take on it is that what I see is that there's more gratitude around stuff. And so if you think about, like, in America, the guy across the street gets a new Cadillac, and you have an old Cadillac, and so, oh shit, you better go get a new Cadillac to keep up with that guy, and your social status there's a lot less of that there. You could have this old, piece of crap car, and you'd be just super grateful to have the car. Here's a story. This is one of the things that really first made me just fall in love with Bhutan. So I've traveled all over the world, and when you're in another world, particularly like a developing economy, and a child comes up to you, that child wants money or candy or both. And they're gonna come over and they're, oh, please, mister, please, and oh, I'm a cute little kid, give me some cash. So first time I'm in Bhutan, I'm running the marathon, and I'm at about mile 19, which, as a runner, that's a shitty time in the marathon. It's mile 19. And this kid starts riding down the trail on this little bicycle that looks like he made himself out of, like, spare scrap metal. It's rattling, and he's pedaling like furiously towards me. And I'm like at mile 19, and I'm like, here we go. He's gonna want some money. I don't have any money, and I don't even have a lot of emotional energy to even give you at mile 19 at 7,000 foot, altitude. But he comes riding up to me, and I'm like, all right, whatever. And he gets to me, and he turns his bike around, and he starts riding next to me. And he starts cheering me on. He's like, you can do it. Do your best. You can do it. You can do it. And I'm like, wait, you don't want anything from me? Like, you're trying to help me? And then he pedals off. And I see him pedal up 100 yards up the trail, and he stops by this, like, little shed, like corrugated metal shed. And he, like, throws his bike down. He runs into the shed. And he comes out, and he's standing by the side of the trail. And I can see him holding something. And I'm like, okay, here we go. He's going to try to sell me a trinket or something. And I get up to the kid, and he's got this half full bottle of Pepsi. And he's handing it to me. He's like, you're thirsty. Here, you can have my Pepsi. And I just was like, dude, you don't even have a house, and you're giving me your Pepsi. Like, this is unbelievable. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, this culture is different than what I am used to. And also, I'm a cynical bastard for even thinking that this guy was going to hit me up for cash, when truly he was and he was like maybe 6 years old.
And do you think there's a danger in that, if they're looking to really bring Westerners to Bhutan and open themselves up more to Western society? Do you think there's an inevitability that will change?
I think so, and I think that they're worried about that, and I think what they're trying to do is modernize at a rate that allows them to maintain their sense of cultural identity. And truly, you go there, there's not a Starbucks on every corner, nor are they trying to put a Starbucks on every corner, or a Kentucky Fried Chicken, or whatever. But at the same time, they do want things like better healthcare, better, cleaner energy, more, better, cleaner water. So how do you achieve those objectives, but balance this sense of cultural identity? And from my perspective, and I've been to a lot of developing economies where they have not done it right, I think the Bhutanese are doing it better than anyone else I can tell. But, jury's out. To your point, there's risk.
And how was that marathon? Because I've been injured for kind of 2.5 years, but actually I had 2 races on my bucket list. One of them was Ultra X Mexico, but the other one was the multi-day race. It's got an incredible name. It's where you end up in a temple. It's something like Run to the Dragons, or the Palace of the Sky. That looked incredible. Like, is running there kind of unique compared to other races and other countries?
Yeah, I mean, Well, for me, number one, it's at altitude. And I live, at sea level. So that creates more issues for me than folks who live and train at altitude. I think the second thing is the infrastructure is not really there. So you are truly running on, some trails that are not, hey, you're a half hour out of San Francisco, up on the trails in Mount Tamalpais. No, you're in the Himalayas running on serious trails. I think there's a sense of, there's an energy that I feel in Bhutan, which is, it's kind of a serene but powerful energy, if that makes sense. Like you get off the plane and you can just feel it. And so my experience with running there is you just you don't give a shit about the things that you normally care about when you're running. You're just like there, and there's a higher degree of presence, at least for me. That's what I've experienced there. And then also you're looking at all this crazy scenery, that's unbelievable. So it's truly, I mean, if you were going to run an interesting race, the Bhutan Marathon or some of these other races over there, I think would be unlike anything you've ever done before.
And then with this ultra, then putting on another, because there's so many hardest ultra in the world. What's the format of it then? So is this a multi-day event? Would this just be a kind of constant time trial, or?
Well, so there's the race that I've run twice there is just the normal international Bhutan Marathon. So it's a regular, 26.2 or 42K distance. It's run on the same course every year. I think they didn't run it the last 2 years because of COVID. I think they've run it maybe 5 times, maybe 6. It's always like the first weekend of March. And so that is a very kind of typical, traditional, let's call it, marathon. You take the bus up to the starting line and everybody runs, down, and it's great. The Snowman Run is this multi-day invitational 5-day thing, and my understanding is it's going to be, there's five days, and sort of you run to the next stop, and then they add up your times over the course. It's not just whoever gets to the end first wins, because of safety reasons. Like you can't really be running on some of these things.
And do you know who they've invited?
That is, so I think the field was limited to 25 runners internationally, and then 5 Bhutanese runners, and then a couple of stupid guys like me who are peripherally connected and have kind of the ability to go, but not really be a competitor. And so I'm not quite sure how they did the invites. Lewis would probably know, because I think he was involved in that. But I remember, so the first race was going to be, they're going to run it in October every year. And so they're planning for it for October, and in February is when lockdown happens. So I don't know that they even got to the stage of having a bunch of invites go out for the first one, and then it hasn't been run since. So hopefully they'll do it. It's a really cool idea, and it's a really cool course, and I want to do it. So I hope they put it back on the schedule.
And do you know how much kind of climbing there is within that those 5 days?
I do know, and I'm trying to remember. I want to say it's like 150,000 feet.
Okay, so kind of a bit over Everest a day then, in I guess the climb.
Yeah, but it's staged interestingly. I remember looking at the staging, and like the first day I think is the shortest, and then like day 2 is the longest, and it kind of is a function of the peaks and stuff. You can go to Snowman Run. I think it's snowmanrun.org, but it might be .com, and I think they have all those stats up there. I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't.
And you mentioned, because I'm a little bit conscious of time, you mentioned then you're going to be bringing out a book then linked to your wine experience and your kind of wine background. So do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So I actually have a theory that at least in America, we screwed up wine and we made wine this big, intimidating thing that you have to be a snob to enjoy it, and it's expensive. And when you go to other countries like, Spain, it's just part of life, or Italy, it's just part of life. Everyone drinks wine, it's fine. Like everyone can enjoy it. It's not an elite thing. And so what I started doing was publishing like an email a week where I just recommended to my friends, like, hey, here's a 2-minute read about a wine that I think is cool, like Vermentino. Vermentino was one of them. Like, this is why I really like Vermentino. It's on Sardinia. It's got this thing. It's cheap. It's super interesting. It's easy to drink. Goes great at the pool. Here's a bottle that I recommend. And so I started sending out these emails, and they started getting forwarded all over the world. And pretty soon I had just people from everywhere were like, hey, send me the emails. So I set up a website so I wouldn't have to deal with it. So you could just self-select in and get the emails. And then people were sending me emails saying, hey, I'm late to the party. Can I get all the back issues? And so I said, okay, I'll figure out a way to do this. So I packaged up the first 52 and put them out as a book with the idea that someone could take it and over the course of a year, spend a little bit of time and become a wine expert with doing very little work. Yeah, and it became a bestseller in the U.S. Actually, we were also the bestseller, the best-selling English wine book in Germany for a while, which is a very esoteric thing. But yeah, if people are interested, they can just go to the website. It's drinkingandknowingthings.com, put their email address in, and they can start getting them. Yeah. Or if they want the book, they can go on Amazon. There's 2 volumes out now, so you have 2 years worth of stuff to do. And actually, I just released a book on Saturday, which is the Drinking and Knowing Things Guide to New Zealand. And it is currently the #1 new release in wine collecting on Amazon, at least in the US.
And is that is that all about the wine industry in New Zealand then?
Actually, what it is the way I set it up was, because people always ask me, oh, I'm going to France. Where should I go? Who should I visit? And so I wanted to write that up, but France is way too complicated, so I started with New Zealand. So it's really a guide for if you were going to go to do a wine trip to New Zealand, this is where I recommend you go. This is what I recommend you see. This is what I recommend you do. Here's how to have fun with it. And it's very kind of irreverent, not snobby, trying to make it something that anyone can do and enjoy and have fun with it and find joy in it without having to worry about being a douche about it or spending a ton
And what's
of time.
the unknowing things part? Is there also a different element in there of like a fact that you throw in, or is it just more the approach to wine?
Well, I stole Drinking and Knowing Things from Game of Thrones, from Tyrion Lannister saying, I drink and I know things. But truly, it is. It's sort of like the knowing things part is, so now you know things about Vermentino.
Yes, I do.
And now you're going to hopefully go buy a bottle and drink it and see if you like it. And if you do, awesome. And if you don't, cool, try something else. But that's sort of the idea behind it. You know a little bit about, I didn't bore you with 20 minutes of esoteric details about it. I gave you kind of the big picture things, and now go try something. Drinking and knowing.
And how does this all kind of fit together with being, I guess, a partner at a Big Four consultancy where, are they aware that you're setting up a wine industry in another country? Are they aware of the books? Are they supportive? Is it something that's on the side or?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's aware. I have disclosure requirements, right? So I have to fully disclose. I actually don't. I have a management team that runs the winery, so I'm not actually involved in the operational day-to-day. But I'm the founder and I oversee it. And I get involved in sort of strategy decisions. But yeah, I mean, I think there are some rules that we have to worry about with independence and so on and so forth. But as long as I am mindful about those, I mean, the firm is generally supportive of people doing things outside of the firm that are accretive and don't compete and aren't, like, it's not like I'm trying to set up a wine consulting business on the side, right? I'm planting some grapes. And it's shocking actually how many of our partners do own wineries.
Oh, really?
None of them are in the Himalayas, but there's a number of them that do own, personal wineries and small.
And what
wineries,
would you say that the general quality is of those wineries from your kind of professional opinion? Without
Well, so one of our partners, she actually just retired from the firm a couple years ago. She makes a Cabernet in Napa that's extremely highly regarded and fetches pretty high prices. I think her wines are about $300 a bottle, and very sort of highly regarded, small quantities. One of my other partners, who also just retired actually last year, he owns a winery that they produce a lot of like Pinots and Syrahs, and at a much lower price point, $40-$50, and his. I actually have never tried his wine, so I don't know, but he's been growing like rapidly over the last 5 years. So he's doing something, whatever that is.
Oh, well, and then in terms of your next steps, what are the big races out there for you that still kind of pique your interest?
Well, I've been doing some wine marathons.
Oh, amazing!
So I don't know. Do you know the Medoc
Very,
Marathon?
very well. Yeah.
Okay. So I ran that in 2019. That's a hell of a fun marathon. I actually ran the one in Alsace, France, a couple years before that, which I thought was even more fun because it wasn't as big and overblown as the Medoc one.
Is that the Champagne one
in Mendoza, Argentina. There's a Champagne one. Yeah, there's a bunch of these, right? And so one of the things I've been wanting to do is like start going through and doing all the wine marathons. There's one in there's one in Italy.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be kind of cool to do all the wine marathons.
There's a wine 10K, I think, in cellars in somewhere like Albania. It's meant to be quite memorable.
Oh, in the great big cellar that's with all the tunnels under
That's
underground.
right, yeah.
Oh, I have heard about that. Yes. Now that would be awesome too.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't really touch on the sort of bringing you close to the edge, challenging yourself.
Well, it depends how much you drink. You can do.
That's true. That's a fair point. But I want to do the North Pole Marathon, where you go to the sea ice at the North Pole. I haven't done that one yet. I'd love to do the volcano one. That sounds just gnarly as hell.
I don't think I know that. Where's that one?
It's in the
Nicaragua or something.
It's in like northern. It's the north part of South America.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's.
So it could be Nicaragua.
It is called, like, the name of it is the Volcano Marathon, and you run along the edge of a volcano. I guess it's pretty gnarly. I think it's high altitude, 12,000 feet, and super hot.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I mean,
there's so many cool races out there to do, and I love that people are going out and running the LA Marathon again. Good for them. It beats not running, but I think they're missing out on some opportunities to really do some outside the comfort zone.
And would you say there are any
really
good outside the comfort zone races that you've done without having to travel quite as much, or ones, I guess, a bit more accessible?
Well, so there's a race that I didn't do it this year. It's actually one of Luis Escobar's. It's his personal race. It's called Born to Run, and it's a 4-day kind of loop course. And you can do a 10-mile, you can do a 30-mile, you can do a 60-mile, you can do a 100-mile, you can do a 200-mile, or you could just run the whole time and see how far you get. They also have a prize for like whoever runs the most. And that's literally, it's an hour and a half drive from my house, but it's got a really like festival atmosphere, and people are dressed up and everyone's partying and having a great time. And people that are wanting to run are running, and people that aren't wanting to run are having a good time. And that, to me, like that's a race that's super accessible, but very different from any other race. Like, no one really cares about time. Everyone's just there because they're passionate about running, and you can run as far as you want. Like, there's this one guy every year who goes out and tries to set the record. I think last year he got to 330 miles in 4 days. And, other people, like, hey, I want to try to see if I can do 50.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Well, yeah.
So that's an example of one that's super accessible to people in Southern California, but very, very different and very, very
And I guess
cool.
as well, even any of the backyards now, they're so you can really push your limit. Well, everyone can push your limit there because there is no end time really, unless you're going to win the whole thing. So you can find out what your limit is quite quickly. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And if people want to follow you, is the best thing for them to do just to go on the website, Drinking and Knowing Things, or do you have an active kind of Instagram or Facebook page as well?
I do, yeah. So they can, if they want to go to Drinking and Knowing Things, there's links to the books if they're interested in that, or they can just sign up for the email distribution. They just get emails. Or they can follow me on Drinking and Knowing at Instagram. And then Bhutan Wine is super easy. It's bhutanwine.com, or Instagram is Bhutan Wine. Twitter is Bhutan Wine. So they can kind of check out what's going on with that. And yeah, I look forward to people are absolutely free to contact me with wine questions or Bhutan questions or stupid running questions.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And when you've got some wine to sell from Bhutan, let us know, because I'm sure they'll be snapped up by the listeners.
Yeah, I'll come back on and we'll open a bottle together and we'll drink it.
That would be incredible. Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thanks again, Michael, and good luck with your future endeavours.
Cheers, man. Thanks for having me on.
So, Dubatters, what do you think of that one? Well, firstly, thanks to trying to remember who it was that suggested Michael. Alex Strafty. Yeah, he was a great guest, and I don't know much about wine. I don't really care that much about wine, but I just love. Bhutan is a place I've always wanted to go to, and particularly to race there as well, because I've had such good things. I know Albatross. I think it's Albatross who organised the Great Wall of China Marathon. I did the Bagan Marathon with them. They've got a race out there. I think they do the multi-day. So I had my eyes on that one. But it would be really interesting to see how this big ultra goes, and also who they invite, because it's, well, people who are good at multi-day might not necessarily be good at that, because doing that kind of climbing is such a different undertaking on your legs. But if you enjoyed that episode, I'm trying to think of good other episodes that kind of link in with that theme. Jody and I have talked about Medoc Marathon. I think it was almost the first or second episode as our favourite races ever. That's certainly up there. It's an incredible race. The Croatian Wine Marathon episode, if you can find that one, that was fun all round. One of the best races we've ever done too. Other episodes kind of similar. We spoke to Mira from Nepal. She, Greg as well. Greg from Salomon. Both of them talked about kind of bringing trail running to that region and what it was like to have runs on those trails, and also to try and introduce a culture to a country. Those are fairly similar in content. Similar booze wise, we've not really had anyone else who's started their own industry in the country. So, but if there's any guests out there that you'd like us to interview with similar kind of topics or similar bravado or spirit, then let me know. David@badboyrunning.com or letters@badboyrunning.com. If you want to hear some other stories that link more to things like the Antarctic Marathon, in fact, we should get Richard Donovan on. Just haven't asked him. Don't know why. Should do. He'd be great. But we've Mike Wardian was brilliant in talking about setting the record of 7 marathons, 7 continents in 7 days. And Greg White also came on. He broke that record. I don't know if he did it with Richard actually, but I think they did their own version of it and broke the record more recently. So those episodes as well really go into that. And Jenny Davis she's attempted to solo trek to the South Pole twice, and sadly hasn't made it either time. But because of that, the stories were just incredible. Her leg, when in essence her leg and her clothing became the one and the same thing, and the scars we put in the group from that, incredible. Such a badass. But thanks for listening, guys. please do subscribe, rate and review us. If you're listening on YouTube, watching on YouTube, let us know below in the comments which name would you come up with for a wine, that first wine, and how much you'd be prepared to pay for a bottle. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye 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 bye.